I'm grateful to all of you, first of all, for coming here and giving us a chance to interact with you. And then also grateful to both Imdad and Stefan for being here and sharing with us their experiences and their thoughts about development in Pakistan. Gambling for Development is a book written by Professor Darkon some time back uh, about his experiences in different countries of the world and how some countries have been able to develop and others have not been able to form coalitions for development. So I thought that it would be appropriate to start with requesting Stefan to really talk a little bit about the process, the political process that countries follow to achieve development. So, Stefan.
Well, thank you very much, and great pleasure, and thanks for having me. So, the book I wrote, titled "Gambling on Development: Why Some Countries Win and Others Lose," it's not. Let me first make very clear: it's not an academic book where I just wanted to give you a totally new idea. This is borrowed from a lot of people, from a lot of different people's work, to actually how economics and politics interacts really, and to begin to communicate this better. I'm an economist. Normally economists are very bad at talking about politics. I'm not saying I'm doing this any better, but at least I want to recognize, having worked myself inside government, is that politics matters, and without politics you'll never get the technical economic changes in any country. Now, more substantively, let me make a couple of points in the way I really think about it. Is that I used to work as a chief economist of the aid agency of DFID. It was active here in Pakistan, in Lahore. Actually, I used to have a big office, but it's all over the world. And if you start looking at all these countries we were working in across Africa and Asia, I found really interesting is that those countries that you could arguably say looking exposed at relatively successful indicators, they definitely didn't follow one recipe. They definitely didn't simply say, as maybe my friend Jim Robinson and Darren Acemoglu would say, oh, they will have a democracy. No, actually, unfortunately, I'm a Democrat. I love my democracy. But that's not the defining feature of it. It's not as simple as that. They also didn't do as simply, they chose a state-led development. No, Indonesia is done really, really well, and it's not a state-led development model. And you just thinking it's what we then talk about, it must be the developmental state. Well, I don't even believe in that, because there's plenty of places that have made good progress where I don't think ever the conditions for a development state were there, kind of a really well-functioning bureaucracy with a certain, commitment to technical and meritocratic delivery of the things. If it isn't there, that's not the way it was done. So again, Indonesia was not, in that sense, a developmental state in the way that sometimes people use it. So it's not about a simple recipe, some kind of reductionism. And it's an interesting thing that the more and more I thought about it, it's that it's not necessarily that there is this kind of singular thing around the what, but there is an element about the how these countries succeeded. And so the big thing, I think, that is the common element when you look at across relatively successful countries, so lots of Southeast Asian, East Asian countries, a couple of African ones, but of course also Bangladesh in its own way was quite successful in recent decades in terms of growth and also the inclusion. Of course, India as well growing really fast, and lots of indicators that it now totally surpassed where Pakistan is. So there's these things, these are all very diverse sets of countries, but what do they have in common is that somehow or another, I think at some point or another, and we can talk about how they got there, but there is somehow a well-identifiable, broad, as Miftah was implying already, the kind of coalition of power that had its incentives broadly aligned with growth and development. So I'm not saying that they suddenly had the vision, oh, we're all going to be nice to everybody and make inclusive development work, but somehow or another, those people with power, I call them in the book the elite, but it's a word that has so many connotations, but those people with power and influence, there's a coalition around them in politics, in business, in the military, in civil society. Somehow or another, there is a kind of a, broadly speaking, a similar hymn sheet from which they are singing, okay? Not the same, politics doesn't end. It's not like as everything stops, but It's a bit like, look at whether you look at Ghana or you look at China or you look at Bangladesh. There are periods then that there is this kind of clearly somehow the incentives seem to be well aligned. It doesn't mean that there's not moments when everything is under real pressure. China had it in Tiananmen Square. Bangladesh is going through this, but somehow or another there are these moments. There's periods where there's a kind of this broad coalition functions well, and a lot of progress is happening. So, but let's be clear what the features are. So if I look at relatively successful countries, growth and development typically go hand in hand. That's not about growth versus development. There's no country that actually ever manages to stay in growth without actually working on development and making some inclusion. There's even IMF research that tells you if inequality gets too high, there won't be any growth. So these things, they tend to go in hand. But what do these countries then do beyond somehow maybe a kind of that coalition? Or how do I see that coalition in action? So there's probably three things here. And the first thing that I see is across countries is some kind of commitment to keep the show on the road. A kind of a political stability, a kind of a stability to take this forwards. So it's a bit like there's certain elements that are taken outside politics somehow. That somehow or another we're going to keep this going. You could say technically there's an element of policy continuity, but it's also politically so is that certain things you're not fundamentally going to question. There's a certain thing around it, some agreed principles around the economy, but it has to be with some kind of growth side mindset, and I'll come back to that probably later when we talk more about Pakistan. It can't just be a coalition for stability to keep the status quo as it is. It has to somehow, there's a coalition there that wants to make progress. And then a few things that, because I say there is no single recipe. In fact, I like to quote Robert Solow, Nobel Prize winner, probably the best growth economist that we can think of. He has a nice line when he was asked about Bangladesh. Can you tell us a bit what Bangladesh should do next? And says, well, look, I know the ingredients of growth, but I don't know the recipe. There is no singular recipe there, but you can see some of these ingredients. And one of the things I definitely is really important is something about the idea of what does the state do, what doesn't it do? And sometimes sometimes people would like to say the state should just do what it should do, but it's still a bit hard because if you don't really love China, say the state should do everything. No, it's actually, I like to actually be more pragmatic and say, just understand your state and understand what it can do. And if it's set up in a particular way, it better doesn't do certain things. That's Indonesia for me, there's Bangladesh as well. The state can't do everything. It will need other players to do it. If you have as powerful and well-organized and meritocratically set up a state as historical Korea or indeed China, then maybe the state can do more, okay? But if you don't have that, you can't do it. So anyway, and then the final thing is be willing to correct, There is no single, don't be ideological, don't keep it going, you need to then be willing to change. So, okay, so can I make this a bit more concrete? Well, let me make this concrete by briefly saying it's not enough in terms of having a beautiful published plan with perfect ideas. That's no way it's enough, okay? My best example is in Congo, in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I had joyful experiences being explained probably the best development plan you could ever see, with wonderful acronyms, with lots of great use of language and metaphors. And I remember being in a presentation of it when all the advisors were trying to explain it to me. And I remember walking out of the room in Kinshasa, out of the Prime Minister's office, and thinking, wow. In fact, it was one of the Congolese colleagues told me, quel spectacle, which is in English like, what a spectacle, what a show, because we knew there was nothing going to be implemented. Okay, so it needs to be not about having lofty ideas and lofty plans, but it has to be something about quite concrete things. For example, I saw that in Ethiopia, they knew they had a few things they were going to do. They were trying to keep on doing, and they kept on trying to get the show on the road, and they kept on doing it. It doesn't have to be even a document. It has to be, sometimes can be quite implicit that you're just really going to pursue this. But also, and maybe that's the final point for as an introduction, is you have to pick your moment. And it's very striking that in the countries that started doing these things, it's usually when the outlook is quite bleak. And you can understand, because as long as the outlook is quite positive, the status quo looks great and attractive to those people with power. But it's a crisis moment that has to say, look, this kind of thing needs to change. It's a bit like that's what we're experiencing in Bangladesh at the moment. You know, that something that looked quite good developmentally over a period of time, as a lot of people, and Miftah Khan's in the room and he will talk, I'm sure, tomorrow, I think, on Bangladesh more. You know, at some point it turns into crony capitalism rather than growth that actually is reasonably inclusive. And I say it's crony capitalism, at some point it runs out of steam. That's a crisis moment. That you have to have a moment to do it. I think, and that's the last thing to say, I think Pakistan has actually one of these moments. Okay? And I would say there's three things that make me say this is one of these moments where this can be a moment for direction that you don't just only focus on stability, but also want growth. And the first thing is that can I quickly say it? That the old model is a bit can't just be continued. And what would I call with the old model is that whenever anything goes wrong, there is someone that writes you a check, external finance will come and rescue you.
Okay.
You know, there's probably the first IMF program that finance secretary can talk about that actually has to be properly delivered, because there's no more American soldiers in Afghanistan. And at that moment, the geopolitical trends dry out. And anyone who thought for a while that China was going to do this, they're learning that China's debt is dead.
Thank you, Stefan. I actually will ask you one other question before I move to Imdad. Because you've made a distinction between growth and development, and I think that maybe for the audience you define both growth and development, okay, and tell us which comes first.
Yeah, but, you know, this is a bit like, you know, I have worked quite a lot in China, and they often like you to tell you in one line something. They're two sides of the same coin, and so you have to just keep on thinking in these terms. You know, there is no such a thing. Let's do growth first, and then we'll worry about development. Because both from an economic point of view, but also from a political point of view, you can never sustain this. You won't be able to sustain this in a country like Pakistan if you only narrowly focused on the growth side. But similarly, if you think, oh, let's do first just development and then we'll worry about this. No. Again, you need finance secretary needs resources. You need to be able to generate these things, and development and inclusion needs resources as well. So you need to find a way of doing it. But having said that, growth, substantial growth is really, really becomes a very important thing, and I think sometimes naively neglected. Stability is not enough to actually generate the resources to actually start really working on developmental path. So you'll need them. So is this a cop-out? I don't know. But I just can't see anymore the distinction in the way that sometimes people...
Fair enough. So now we move to Imdad, and I remind Mr. Bosal that in the last 3 years we've had growth of 1.7%, and our population has been growing by 2.4%. So we are basically getting poorer by 0.7% every year, average Pakistani is. So do we have a growth plan, Mr. Bosal?
Thank you very much. Sir, I think before you have a growth, just to come straight to your question, before you have a growth, you have to have a stabilization. And I would pick up from from what Stefan was making a point that you have to pick your moment when the outlook is bleak. So I would take you back to what the situation was in 2023, June 2023. Your GDP growth was negative. Your inflation was like an all-time high. You had seen massive devaluation, and your industrial growth, your LSM was large-scale manufacturing was seeing massive contraction. So you can't have a growth under these circumstances. You first have to get your macroeconomic fundamentals right. And what we have done over the last 1.5 years or so, we have come a long way. If you look at the macroeconomic fundamentals, whether it's inflation, whether it's the reserves position, whether it's initiating reforms across various sectors of the economy. I think what we have seen over the past 75 years, that in our pursuit for growth, we have not addressed the structural issues of the economy. And since we have not addressed those issues, whenever we have attempted to keep the growth going, whether you take it 80s, you take 80s, you take 90s, you take the last quarter of a century since 2000, you have seen periods of growth and you have seen periods of stagnation, because you have tried to have growth without addressing the structural issues. And our program of IMF, despite all the criticism that we keep hearing about IMF, some of the reforms that are embedded in the IMF program are actually, at least I'm quite confident they are going to set us on the path of stabilization. And once you have stabilization, then I know, there is a great urge, here and there that, we need to immediately go again the growth path. But I think, we first have to improve our fundamentals. We have to stabilize our fundamentals. We have to strengthen our fundamentals, and then we have to tread the path of growth.
Okay, thank you, Jaisab. So you talked about undertaking reforms before we go for growth to ensure that there is stability in the economy. What reforms do you have in mind that you want to do over the next year or so before we can embark on growth? Because, I mean, if we are a fast-growing population, so at some point we would need growth. Also, for revenue increases, we would need growth. So what reforms do you have in mind?
So I would ask you to look at the data, Again, we are talking about growth. Whenever we had a growth, it has always been consumption-led growth. It hasn't been investment-driven growth. And if you look at the last 25 years, our consumption as a percentage of GDP has ranged, hovered in the range of 85 to 93%, at times 94%. Whereas your investment as a percentage of GDP, it has just remained in the range of, say, 14 to 15%. Now look at the countries that we keep citing about: India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Turkey. The investment to GDP has been in the range of 30%. If you look at India is an interesting case study. From 2006 to 2012, their investment to GDP was in the range of 38 to 40%. So what are we going to do? Coming back to your question, we are actually trying to create a level playing field for investment. And how we are going to do that? We are removing all the tax exemptions. We are not going to give any tax concessions or special tax treatments to selected sectors of the economy, so that there is a level playing field, so that the resources on their own go to the most efficient sectors, and you don't pick winners. In your urge to pick winners over the last 75 years, you have been creating distortions in the economy. So we're moving away from that. We are almost on the verge of making a tariff rationalization plan, which is going to commence from the next financial year, where we are removing high tariffs, removing the protection that our domestic industries enjoy, and therefore they don't look outwards. They are not export oriented, and again, if we have to have a growth, we have to have a growth which is export led. And with the tariff structure that we have, we can't have a growth which is going to be export led. So we are working on that. We are also working on removing the regulatory requirements, again to improve the business climate. And a lot of work has been done. Concrete work is being done by the Board of Investment on that. In terms of having a regulatory guillotine, as they say. We are also working on when it comes to exports. We intend to focus on those sectors where there is which are competitive and which are diversified. we don't enjoy the protection. And one last thing before you move on, look at the fiscal consolidation. We have achieved a fiscal consolidation over the last 1.5 year, and we are going to build on that. We intend to improve our primary balances. You must have heard, Chairman FBR in a previous session, our tax to GDP ratio. So again, creating space for investments, public spending investment in areas where there is a room for growth, and also by having fiscal consolidation, creating room for the private sector to get credit and to reduce your borrowing needs.
Thank you, thank you. So now, Stefan, given what Imdad has said about some reforms, including reducing custom tariffs, trying to increase investment to GDP ratio and stuff like that. You've also worked on Pakistan and Pakistan's economy. Do you think that these are the steps sufficient? And what steps would you recommend Pakistan take?
Right. Okay. So, look, you have to understand is that the stabilization matters. There's just no country that somehow can keep its growth going if its macro stability all the time gets undermined. And you get in a very strange situation in Pakistan here, that the data tells us, and research has told us, that whenever you start growing at about 3.5%, which is just beating population growth, you'll have a balance of payments crisis. This is how you get 24 IMF programs. And you have to ask yourself, but why is this? Because the problem in Pakistan is not that it doesn't grow. The problem with Pakistan is that the structural economy is such that it can't grow. And that's why we talk about structural reforms are needed. Okay? And so, because structural reforms is the only way you can begin to think about of this crisis of growth, which is in the end a crisis of productivity. Productivity growth in Pakistan over the last 2 decades has been 1/10 of what Vietnam achieved. It's 1/5 of what India achieved, and similar numbers probably in that region, also relative to Bangladesh. Yeah? And now you have to ask yourself, but why is this? And you were alluding this to already to what you may try to do this. But, this is an economy where those people with capital don't seem to have that much incentive to invest. There's something to do with the investment ratio of GDP, and it's not about public investment. Okay, that's low, but that's actually low in quite a lot of countries. It would be good if we had some more fiscal resources on the public investment side, but it's the private investment side that is dramatically low. And so there's something with the structure of the economy that's not getting us. So when you then start talking about, okay, what do you do about it? Well, you begin to think a bit about it, what is there in the investment climate that we can make attractive, okay? And then everybody says, oh, the taxes are too high. And then you say, no, wait a minute. Productivity, the tax of value added in this country is actually low relative to its value added. It's again to do with the structure and the way that you can begin to think about it. So yes, IMF will say consolidate fiscally, but if you don't want to move forward, is to really begin to think about, how do I begin to reform the structure of our taxation, that the incentives are set for investment? And it's the same point, comes back to the trade side. So I'm actually, there's nothing deeply, historically, trade liberalization focused in anything I tend to say. But if you observe how the tariff structure in this country seems to have been largely to do what is, purely about protecting those who exist already, and that actually it is very little about trying to create an environment to create either competition or incentives to grow. And if it's just protecting incumbents who are have very low productivity, that's not a productivity incentive. That's just keeping the status quo again. So again, I think there's a few things. I wish they would go much further in tariff rationalization and pushing further. And the same actually is on the fiscal side, and I've implied it. Fiscal consolidation is the first step, but then really begin to think about what is the overall structure of public finance and what incentives does it set in the economy that you do it. So I think what Imdad is already, or finance sector is already implying, I actually applaud some of the things to do. And I come to maybe what I would recommend in this country. The problem with all of this is that there's plenty of incredibly smart people that have said this already for 30 years in this country. What I just said and what we were talking about is not new. There's several people in the room, in fact, who've said it. There's think tanks like PIET and others that have said this for a long time. The problem here is typically about, are we willing to implement these things? And are we just, again, producing a glossy document that says we're going to do some amazing things? Or are we willing to move to implementation, those essential parts of it that we want to do it? And I think this is where I think the biggest challenge is. And I come back to the link with politics in a big sense, not just the party politics, but in a broader sense. Where is that coalition building between all the vested interests that actually saying, actually, to be honest, we could be better off if the pie was better off, larger as well. Yes, it does mean, structural reforms does mean there's winners or losers, there's some difficult choices, there's short-term versus long-run trade-offs. Is to willing to actually implement and actually doing it. And I think that's, the harder question here, and that's maybe a final sentence, because even when we are in a situation where now of stagnation, the status quo tend to work for those groups that have deep vested interest. The status quo works. And so somehow or another, it requires these forces in society also to be willing to say, look, we want to implement it, and actually put deeds and action behind the kind of ambitions that finance sector and the things that I must say, I meet civil servants also trying to implement it, to actually get a much more a virtuous cycle of actually becoming more and more ambitious in the structural reforms we do.
Thank you.
So what gives me hope this time is, and as Miftah Sahab, you know it very well, I was again take you back to, the situation that we were in. I think we have never been so close to economic disaster that we have seen, say, 1.5 years ago. You were, I must say, you were close to default. And so from there, you actually had to pick things up and, get into an arrangement whereby you could actually pursue stabilization in the first place. And what was so particularly different about that standby arrangement was that all the political parties at that point in time, the major political parties, signed on it. They kind of lent their support to it because they knew there was no other choice. And I totally share the skepticism that Professor Stefan is alluding to, and it's very legitimate, considering considering our track record, as he was referring to that, we have had 25 IMF programs, so how this program is going to be different, And again, IMF program is not about growth, it sets the ground for growth, but it is not about growth itself. But why this program, what makes it different is, and as you have been the finance minister, for the first time, I would call it a national program. I would not call it any longer a federal program, because you have brought the provinces in. Whether it comes to taxes or whether it comes to expenditures, So you are actually placing yourself on a much firmer footing when it comes to fiscal consolidation. And unless you have a fiscal consolidation, you are not going to have resources for the private sector investment or even for the productive public sector investment. And some of the the point that you are making about tariff rationalization, I think it's a great point. And we have to. There is no other choice except to go the path of tariff rationalization, because the protection that you are giving to your domestic industries, there is no way in the world they are going to look outwards, become competitive, become outward oriented, and actually pave the way for export-led growth.
Yeah.
And if we are going to have an export-led growth, I'm sure that is going to be sustainable and not the path that we have been traversing all along.
Okay. So since I've bored Mossadegh here, so I'm going to now ask you a little more parked up questions. You said, Imdad, this is a national program as opposed to federal program. Then two of the promises the provinces made were a national finance pact whereby they would take over some federal expenditures in social security, for instance, BISC payments, which is a provincial subject. And then the other promise they made was that they are going to also tax agriculture. Both don't seem to be, how shall I put it gently, very much on track.
Not going to be happy. No, no. I'm glad that you asked this question. But one of the largest provinces, Punjab, has already done that on the agriculture income tax. They have amended the law. In case of KP, the law has been approved. The draft has been approved the bill has been approved by the provincial cabinet, and it is in the provincial assembly. And again, in case of Balochistan, the bill has been approved by the provincial cabinet and it is in the assembly. In Sindh, yes, of course, there are issues, but we are working with the Sindh government very closely, to actually have that law passed. And why why we have made this a component in this program is, if you look at tax to GDP, the provincial contribution. I'm not saying that everything that is being done at the federal level is correct or right, but the provincial contribution to taxes is 0.7%. Is less than 1%. Yeah. So we have to tax those sectors, which are untaxed. Whether it's the agriculture, whether it's exporters, whether retailers or wholesalers, or whether it's like real estate. So we have not stopped working with Sindh, and we're working with Sindh. And one more example, because you are referring to provincial cooperation. Again, a part of fiscal consolidation is the surpluses that the provinces generate. And let me tell you, during the current financial year, the provinces have largely been on track. The spending urge that the provinces have given the healthy financial positions that they are in. And I'm not going into the overall structure, the fiscal architecture that we have, but still provinces have worked very closely with us. And when it comes to GST on services or property tax, we are again working very closely, and I must commend all the provinces. They have been working very closely with us on that.
So, I mean, just for the audience to know, and with due apologies to Nadeemul Haq, that in 2 years ago, the 4 provinces in Pakistan collected a total of rupees 8 billion in property tax. 8 billion in property tax, all 4 provinces in Pakistan combined. That same year, Bombay municipality collected 150 billion Pakistani rupees. So we have some ways to go in property tax. But we were talking also about the National Finance Pact, where they were going to undertake some of the expenditures that really belong to them.
So on the expenditure side, at least the provinces have agreed to start discussing Benazir income support program. They have been there has been a lot of to and fro between us and the provinces, and National Finance Commission award has not happened after the 7th NFC. It's been 15 years. So one option was to actually start working on the National Finance Commission award, which we have to work in any case. But after the 18th Amendment, there are like constitutional limitations on that. So we found via media whereby we could work with the provinces and thus signed the National Fiscal Pact. Now on the spending side, the provinces have for the first time started realizing what they're spending, what they're spending, where they have to co-share with the federal government in some of the areas. Whether it's education, whether it's health. We have been funding higher education. We have been funding.
Why?
This is where we have make provinces come to sit with us and partake some of this funding. And Benazir income support program.
You're also funding gas subsidy to fertilizer, which is not your subject.
No, we are no longer doing that. We're no longer doing that.
Why do you think I asked
There
this
is
question?
there is a power sector. There are only power sector subsidies in the budget. Other than
For agriculture tube wells also.
it's the areas. No, these are the areas. You need to correct yourself. Those are the areas. There is no new power. There is no new subsidy on agriculture tube wells in the budget. It's related to
I
areas.
stand corrected, but the
Yeah.
fact is that there is
Yeah.
a subsidy which
Yeah.
is a provincial subject, but you are
But,
giving it.
but we are moving away from subsidies. But we are
You are
moving away
moving
from
away,
subsidies.
inshallah, inshallah.
We are moving away from subsidies.
Well, I'm also going to start, dieting. So
Yeah. But no,
I have to. Sorry, go on, go on, go make a comment.
No, it's just a comment on that. Is that I mean, I can sense in your voice and also with your experiences in this environment a certain skepticism. I will actually say that in my times of following Pakistan, I'm always a skeptic. I'm an academic. You should be, but I'm probably more optimistic than I've ever been. Because the circumstances, and however hard it is, think of the real estate tax or the agriculture taxation, it's again 30, 40, 50 years people have talked about it. It's actually trying to begin to do bits and pieces. And actually this is a bit like pragmatic realism. There's something we shouldn't forget, for example, about the big neighbor to the east in India, that the reforms in 1991. If you read the budget speech of Manmohan Singh, who recently passed away, and everybody said, oh, they did massive amount of structural reforms. There's actually nothing in there. What he created was the expectation that there was no turning back, that they were beginning to do it and they were going to prove it in bits and pieces. And he always expressed from within a few months after the budget in 91, this is irreversible, trust me. And everybody said, no, it's the BJP come back in power, it's going to be reversed. And it wasn't reversed. BJP voted against initially, and then they started campaigning around it. And now they are the big champions of growth and so on. So that's why I'm trying to mean, you need to do there is a bit, start doing. This is why the implementation parts, let Imdad and co prove it by beginning to implement. But then give them the credit that it's the beginning, because of course it's not going to be enough.
So switching gears from Pakistan just a little bit, and then we'll come back to Pakistan in a minute. In Far East Asia, China, Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, Thailand, etc. In your estimation or in your study or research, what are the 2 or 3 factors that really spurred growth there, fast growth there?
So look, there is 2 or 3 factors. So first of all, let me simply say what are the commonalities that they had, and then doing it. And then there's a bit of a time and age. Okay, there is a window of opportunity that they took advantage of. What say the Koreas and the Japans and China and Singapore have in common was actually from the beginning and from actually inherited a structure of meritocratic bureaucracy and a kind of very technocratic meritocratic bureaucracy that had very limited political incentives. So that actually meant state-led development in China could work with it. In Korea, it looked quite different. In Japan and so on, it looked different. So there is something there that and for me, the common element is there that they understood what they had. So there is an understanding of what the assets had that they had also as a state. They chose different models, but actually with similar outcomes. But they took advantage of, we're talking here of export orientation. And the great thing about export orientation is something about politics. Once you get going with it, it actually creates a discipline on what you do in your macroeconomy. Because otherwise, if you then start getting high inflation or cost increases or very big inefficiencies in your public finance, you lose your competitiveness. And so you create a disciplining device on how the central bank has to work, how the thing. So there's a virtuous cycle in. So they chose it at the moment that lots of countries hadn't quite chosen for it, so they took advantage of it at their different moments. So there is an element there as well. So there's a commonality of pick your moments and understand what you have and what the windows of opportunity are. And then, and then I would say pragmatism. Being willing to correct where you had to, and to actually do. China, it's not that they're doing now exactly what they did in 79. There's big phases of different things problems that they tackled. They couldn't tackle the state-owned enterprises until the 2000s. or the late 1990s. They couldn't tackle the infrastructure or the deficits until much later when they had the resources. So they picked their moments carefully and so on. So I say that's a pragmatism. Know what you have, do it, and take advantage of your global opportunities. And so those who, like in the people who studied East Asian Miracle, trying to reduce it, all they did, and then you have two versions. They did not do Washington Consensus, or they did Washington Consensus, because both of them are true. They did always a mixture and a hybrid because they were pragmatic around it. And that's the kind of thing. So not ideological, pick your moments, know what you can do, and then implement, do what you say. Do what you say on the package. And that's what I call this implicit deep commitment, that you want to be judged by the growth process and the development progress that you make, rather than the lofty words around it.
You want to say something? No. So, okay, so then we come back to Pakistan. I mean, some of the things we've seen, meritocratic bureaucracy in China, the institutions in China growing along with the development. So the China did not have perfect institutions at the time and all that stuff. But if you look at one commonality of these Far Eastern countries, is that they were export powerhouses. They, for either currency reasons or whatever reasons, but they were, their taxation structures were also like this. So Imdad has talked about tariff rationalization, which will automatically reduce production and automatically force some people to export more. But what is it that, because in one of the plans, the export growth in Pakistan is 63 billion in about 4 years. What are your plans for exports, to grow the exports?
So one, as you have said, tariff rationalization. The second area, which is, if it gets through, is going to be really bring about a substantive change when it comes to exports, is are working with Chinese. We are working, our board of investment is working very closely with Chinese. They have organized, a number of road shows there, trying to, have business to business cooperation. And we are working with China to have SEZs, where we could bring in Chinese industries in sectors like, textile, footwear, plastics, fisheries, fruits and vegetables, and all that, where we bring them in and make them export driven. This relocation would result into having industries which take the advantage of low skill, low cost labor, and also help China escape from some of the punitive measures that they are facing right now. So that's one area. Second is the tariff rationalization, as I said earlier. Third is finding new markets, also diversifying exports, working on IT exports. Our National Export Development Board is preparing a roadmap, preparing a roadmap to focus on sector-specific issues when it comes to exports. The policy rate, as you know, has already come down, so that is also going to, reduce the cost of capital.
Interest rates, you mean, policy rate?
The interest rate is coming down, so that is also going to reduce the cost of capital. We have established Exim Bank, again, another institutional arrangement to help boost exports. When it comes to, FBR refunds, those refunds are being made faster. These are like practical small steps, but these are steps in the right direction.
I mean, all things are, I think, right direction, but the one thing that really bothers me, and I think that takes away from our exports, and Musaddiq Malik is sitting here, so I think it's appropriate to bring it up, are the most expensive energy in all of South Asia. Pakistan's electricity tariffs, and I wish Awais were also here, but Pakistan's electricity tariffs are more expensive than India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka. They're also more expensive than Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, South Africa, and Kenya. Then Pakistan's gas tariffs are also more expensive in every country except that I named, except Thailand. Thailand is more expensive. But now when Musaddiq raises the price again, I think in a few days, we will have surpassed, inshallah, Thailand also. In Indonesia, I don't count because they're actually not net importers of energy. But I mean, all the other countries which are what we call comparable countries, slightly richer than us, we have more expensive energy, bijli and gas, power and electricity. Is there any plan do you have to reduce these prices? And do you really think that we can attract the sort of exports and investments that SIFC, mashallah, is trying to attract without reducing these prices?
No, I agree with you. I think, I wish Musaddiq Malik Sahab was here on the stage.
Yeah, answer from there.
he,
I mean,
you know, he
give him the mic.
should have answered from there.
If you
But,
want the mic.
but no, but but
Now,
what?
are you serious? You guys kicked me out from the podium and now you're asking me the questions? You're asking me to field the questions? No, we do have a plan. I think we have a very lopsided gas market. We have three different kinds of gases. We have gas that comes out of the wellhead, which is very inexpensive. Nominally, we pay 570 rupees per million units for that. But if you adjust it for the heat content, it's about 8 to 900. Then we have the piped gas that people get, and the price for that is now going to be about 1700 rupees per million unit. And then there's this imported gas, which it costs you about 3500 rupees per million units. Now, the only way out for us, the only way out of this quagmire is to put a uniform price to gas molecule and then try to protect the people who are very poor and give lower than the rates in neighborhood to the industry so that we can improve productivity and we can also improve growth. So we have a plan for that. It's a very difficult plan, as Stefan said. There's elite capture, massive elite capture, and in the next room when we speak, we'll probably talk about that. And in that elite capture, people who benefit from getting low-cost gas are going to fight it tooth and nail. And I've been defeated at least 3 times over the past 2 years in trying to come up with this uniform pricing. But I'm relentless, and we're going to try one more time this time around.
One additional point to what Musaddiq Saab is saying, the privatization of discos. So we're working very
अच्छा, your
seriously.
privatization. Sir, उस पे एक शेर सुना दूं मैं.
Sir, it doesn't happen easily. It doesn't happen easily.
Okay, so now I'll stop asking questions, and you are such wonderful people sitting here. And I'll request if there are members of the audience, please raise your hands and I'll recognize you. Then you direct the question to me and then I will ask them. Akbar Dadi Saab, go ahead. जाओ बेटा अकबर दादी साहब को माइक दे दो.
Thank you. So in the beginning, Stefan Dercon spoke about, when he gave his analysis of how his book goes about in the country that he speaks about, he mentioned three things: elites, coalitions, and politics. When the finance secretary spoke, all he gave us was a lot of numbers. I'd like the finance secretary to put the numbers in perspective and tell us who our elites are, what sort of coalition would you require to bring about some of the changes? And I'm surprised that Musaddiq actually mentioned elite capture. And a little bit about politics. So what is the coalition, the elites, and the politics around all your grand schemes? Thank you.
So, as I said earlier, I think we have to take small steps. The things that have been there for 75 years can't be changed overnight. We all know that, We have been trying to do that, yet it hasn't happened. So what I see is, and the point that Stefan was making, that you have to pick your moment. You have to pick your moment when the outlook is bleak. And I referred it. Why do I keep referring to it again and again? Because I was there at that point in time, and we were like this close to default. And I think that was a bleak moment. We have seen economic crisis, but we have been kind of cruising or traversing those. But this time it was like we were this close to default. And what you call the coalition of which realizes that this time It's going to be either, you do it or you are damned. And why I gave you the example of SBA, Zaidi Saab. That was the height of political turmoil, height of political uncertainty. There were like political wrangling going on all along at various levels. But the three political parties, PTI, People's Party, and PMLN, signed on the SBA because they realized that this is a bleak moment. As we have come along, we have graduated from SBA to extended fund facility, and people keep asking me, and that's a legitimate question, that why this program is going to be different, and why I call it. And Miftah Saab also said that why it's a national program. You have been an economist, you have written all along. Show me any program which was which had a provincial component in it. And I think we cannot fiscally consolidate without provinces being on board. And why? And the provinces have come along. And again, it's not going to be an easy journey. It's not going to be to a smooth one. We have to keep working with provinces and keep working with different stakeholders. And again, the sense that I get from my 18 months of being in this office is that there is a larger stakeholders consensus, whether it's military, whether it's bureaucracy, or whether it's political class, that we have to fiscally consolidate to actually go the path of economic growth, for which we all clamor for, and we have great urge to go that path. But
Yeah.
but the point is that should we go that path the way we have been going in the past, or we should make it different this time?
Okay.
Could I add for a second? Is actually so it's one of these things, and I'm glad that's that's what I would like to take away from in a way that you were putting it. It's very, very nice. And so it's you may know this line. A poet at some point said, "A revolution won't be televised." The coalition building won't be televised. There's a lot of politics via TV, but this kind of coalition building will happen by people beginning to act in particular ways and in certain ways. And the first step, well, you were describing some of these steps. There's also one more step that I very much think is relevant here, is that for those who can take action, that they actually own the action. Okay, so I think, for example, on the stabilization program, and it's hard for a politician not to say blame the IMF. I can understand that, but actually being willing to say no, actually we do this for ourselves. And for all these reforms, you're not doing it because someone else told me. And so, then actually, Power Minister, I appreciate it, said, look, we want to push for a uniform price and doing it. And it's an incredibly hard battle. And, I still wish you good luck and hope you'll get there. But it is about beginning to do it. And it's not about having this grand coalition and a signature somewhere. It's actually beginning to do with some actions and beginning to do it. And I appreciate the way that also talks about it.
I'll go to the next question, but I just wanted to just make this point because this is the way I am. That Imdad has twice mentioned about Pakistan coming very, very close to default in June of 2023. I won't ask him to name who that one person was who forced us there, but but I note that the Prime Minister flew and met with the IMF without the Finance Minister. Zafar Mirza Sahab.
Thank you. I want to build on the point which Miftah Saab made in his introductory remarks. 1% growth rate and 2.5% actually of population growth rate. And then we talk about growth and development, but then we very conveniently just talk about growth. In this population growth rate, what is our plan for it? What are our targets for next year, for example? What kind of population growth we want to see? Because it is a very much question of growth also, because it directly affects it. Now, it's not only 2.5% population growth rate, it is stagnant for the last 15 years. The total fertility rate in Pakistan has exceeded of that of Saudi Arabia, and it is 3.6 and it is stagnant also for last 15 years. Why do we do not hear in these discussions about growth and development that what would be our target from decreasing the stunted children from 40% to what rate in next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? What would be our target for bringing children outside schools, inside schools? 42% of our women are suffering from iron deficiency anemia. What is our target to bring that next 3 to 5 years? Why these targets do not emerge in the discussions about growth and development? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just also introduce Zafar Mirza Sahab, who was the health minister under PTI government, but is now a national spokesman for Awam Pakistan, and that's why he was talking so sensibly. Inke bas ki baat nahi hai, ye nahi kar sakte. So I will not ask the finance secretary really, to reply about. No, it's a very serious question. But I mean, the finance secretary will really not be able to talk about. Yeah, yes, but the thing is that it's really tariffs, IMF loans, policy rates. We can blame him for that. Population growth, really. I mean, come on.
But let me say something on that, and because no. So one of the things is that the experience of and there is a small part of the world where there's an exception, but the experience, and not in this on this continent, there's the experience is largely be that these fertility rates start declining quite rapidly when development begins to happen. There's no place in the world. I'm taking, for example, I work a lot on Ethiopia, where the fertility rates declined from well above the numbers you quoted to now well below it. And it actually was during a period up to about 2020, 2 decades of actually rapid development spurred on by growth. There is no country in the world that has managed to stimulate development in a sustainable way or for more than a couple of years without also growing the economy. So this comes back to this thing, the two sides of the same coin idea. We can't do without it. What it is possible, what you are describing, that and it basically means that within a context of trying to grow the economy, use these receipts that he starts getting, or at least that the finance minister starts getting, start beginning to be rationally spent of where do we need to spend them? Do we spend them for another subsidy for a protected group from some energy? Or do we actually begin to really target the spending on human capital development and so on? But you'll need to resources room. He'll need to do his job. We need to expand this because without more resources in this economy, it's going to be really hard to get these changes doing. So, but I appreciate your point. But development actually, and development is actually the recipe for fertility declines. It's not anything very narrowly specific on family planning. Health and education are the key part, and of course, the role of women within it.
Thank you, Stefan.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. There was this talk about export-led growth, and you said we are working on export plans. So, and you said we are looking at IT exports. So, what are the plans related to IT exports of the government?
So there is this whole, there is a plan by being made by Ministry of IT. I don't know the details, but there are, if you look at the current financial year's IT exports, the number is already very encouraging. So there is the IT ministry is working on that plan.
So I thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Stefan and Imdad will be here outside to answer any of your other questions. And you as well. And I'm here for selfies. Thank you.